When I think about the night the lie began, I remember the light first. The kitchen light was pale amber, and the room felt quieter than usual. Small truths, heavy lies. I tell myself I won't do it again tonight. I tell myself I'll be honest enough to hold steady through dinner, honest enough to trace every word to its rightful intention, honest enough to wear the truth like a plain coat instead of a fluttering scarf that betrays heat and sleep and fear. But honesty is not a single act. It's a weather system. And tonight, the air is thin with something I'd rather call fog than truth. We've cooked at home for years, me in the kitchen, him at the stove, a choreography we moved through without clash or complaint. The kitchen light glows a pale amber over the chipped wood of the table. The lilac lamp behind me buzzes faintly, the old lamp that remembers every argument and every kiss and every late-night apology. The apartment is quiet tonight, the way a house settles when a storm has passed, but you can still hear the distant wind in the gutters. We've lit candles, set the table as if to feign ceremony for a life that has long ceased to feel ceremonial. He stands with a glass of red wine, a practiced tilt of his head to catch the light, as if the room itself were a spectator. He looks content, the kind of content that makes you think happiness is just a routine you've learned to perform. He asks about my day with the patient calm that used to charm me into telling him every little thing, and now only invites me to bite back the things that feel too close to the bone. "What did you do today?" he asks, not overly curious, not probing in that affectionate way that used to feel like a soft hand. "Nothing extraordinary," I say, which is a kind of lie in itself, because nothing extraordinary has ever come easily to us, and today extraordinary feels like a weapon I can't quite put down. I pause, tasting the wine's bitter sweetness on my tongue, and think about the afternoon. A line of heat runs along my back as if a hand had pressed for a moment against the length of my spine, asking me to stay, to remember, to choose again. The truth is simple only in its present tense. I did not wander through the stalls of the city market or drift among the fruit stands with the hum of strangers around me. I did not buy a single apple, not even the tart, stubborn ones we both like. I did something else with nothing to show for it but the memory of a lie I'd told. What was it? The lie is the shape you see only when you look at it sideways, the way a fault line hides beneath a floorboard until a quiet step makes the whole room shift. I've learned to name it in the moment I utter it and then pretend I didn't. Tonight, I lie with the ease of a practiced actor who knows the script by heart. "I took a walk downtown," I say, instead, letting the words fall lightly as if they're harmless. "Nothing special, just a slow stroll to clear my head." He nods, but not in his ordinary agreeable way. There's a slight tilt to his mouth, a micro-expression that arrives as if a shadow had crossed the lens of his calm. It's not accusation, exactly. It's the quiet pause of someone who hears a note out of tune and wonders if the orchestra will correct it or let it ring wrong through the room. "And what did you see on this walk?" he asks, the curiosity, if not warmth, in his voice now more pointed, more precise, like a question asked by someone who suspects a door is ajar and fears what might lie behind it. "People," I say, lamely. "People and a few dogs, and a vendor with a cart that rattled, one of those carts that sounds like a ship at harbor, every bell a memory you don't want to hear twice." He smiles, the smile that has kept us afloat for years, the small, careful smile that says, "We're not at war, we're simply misaligned, and we'll recalibrate if we must." He pours himself more wine, and I watch the way the liquid catches the candlelight, a small red orbit in a glass. It's a pretty scene, the kind you'd frame and hang on the wall to remind you of a life that once glowed with certainty. The lie I tell sits in the space between my ribs, heavy enough to feel like a stone in a pocket. I want to catalog its every facet, to name it so precisely that it loses its power to deceive. But the power of a lie is not in its complexity, it's in its breath, in how it catches in the throat, and in how easily you forget to exhale the truth you've locked away. We talk of the ordinary things, the garden outside our window, the neighbors who have started a new habit of mowing on Sundays, the child next door who has learned to whistle in a way that makes me think of my own long-ago mornings when the world felt like a machine we were just beginning to figure out. We talk of work, of bills, of the way the calendar seems to shrink by a day a week, as if the year is retracting, trying to hide from something we haven't decided to name yet. Tonight, there is the taste of something unsaid between us, something I keep catching on the edge of my own breath, a story I do not want to tell out loud. And so I don't. The lie grows, not with the loud, explosive force of a slam, but with the slow, stubborn creep of ivy along a brick wall, unseen until it's reached the height of the window and is stubbornly clinging to your vision whenever you pull back the curtain. After the dishes are done, after the quiet that follows the last clink of plates and the soft sigh that comes from a tired kitchen, he asks again about the day. He is not pressing, he is attempting to understand, to see if the woman he married, who once spoke with a fearless candor about every fear, has learned to hollow out her own truth to fit inside a room that is already crowded with old memories. "Did you go to the library?" he asks. It's a simple, almost innocent question, the kind of question you ask when you're trying to anchor a moment in fact rather than feeling. "I did," I say, the lie landing on the table between us, thin as a sheet of paper, easy to flick with a finger. "For a little while. You know how I love a quiet corner with a stack of dusty things that pretend to be knowledge." His eyes soften with a tenderness I still recognize even when I have found a way to pretend the tenderness no longer matters. "What did you read?" he says. And for a moment, I see the old, curious husband who would for a breath be the one to pull back a chair, to lean close, to ask more questions than necessary, because the questions themselves are a map of care. "Grief in the City," I answer, and it's true enough to be believed, or at least to be believed for the moment. It's a harmless book, sober, respectable, the sort of thing you'd recommend to someone who is trying to be careful with their words. The lie rides along with the answer, a quiet passenger that never opens its mouth but sits unblinking in the seat beside me. He doesn't push further. He doesn't need to. The dinner's over, the candles burn low, and the night has settled into that particular gravity where small truths hold the room up and small lies hold us down. The platters are cleared, the wine is poured into the same glasses we've used 100 times, and the soft hum of the refrigerator keeps time with a distant dog's bark somewhere beyond our alley. Later, in the quiet of washing dishes, I let the moment linger in the room, the moment when the lie became a moment of shared silence, a pause that felt almost like intimacy because it required both of us to pretend we were listening to the same silence. The lie is not something I can point to and say, "There, see? There is the thing with its obvious edges." It's more like a thread I wound around the spine of a chair and then forgot to cut, and now the chair is slightly crooked, and every time we sit, we notice the tilt. I watch him move through the small apartment, putting stray dishes away, turning off the lamp by the entry, letting the door to the balcony sigh shut with a soft, tired click that sounds like the closing of a book we never finish. He moves with the quiet efficiency of someone who believes in ordinary days, in the power of routine to keep the world from tipping over. I used to trust that, too. I used to believe in the gentle gravity of the ordinary. Tonight, I fear that gravity more than I fear anger or loss. We stand in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, a threshold that has seen more seasons of sorrow and quiet joy than any other space in our marriage. The air carries the scent of the lilac from the lamp, the metallic tang of the old coffee pot we've never quite managed to retire. The room is not loud. It takes a lot to make a room loud. Tonight, the room feels loud enough to swallow a person whole, the kind of loud that makes you duck your head and pretend you didn't hear the unspoken line that just passed us. "Are you happy?" he asks, not with the loudness of accusation, but with the honest, almost brutal tenderness of a man who wants to believe in the daily gods of a shared life. The question lands hard, and I feel the weight of all the years in the way the word happiness lands on a person's chest, like a stone you realize you've carried longer than you intended, a stone you forgot you were carrying until you put your hand on your ribs and found it there. The next week unfolds like a page that refuses to settle flatly, curling at the edges with thoughts you pretend you didn't fold there. We move through the days with a muted timetable: coffee, clinic, kitchen, the quiet when the city pulls its breath and holds it, listening for a sound that might rise from the far side of our own memory. The lie sits with us, not as a single stubborn point, but as a weathered map, its roots wreathed in the fog of what if and what now. I sense his vigilance, the way he asks questions that are not inquiries so much as tests to see if the ground beneath us can still hold two people who once believed in a whole sky. We don't talk about the lie the way we used to, not openly, not yet. We practice a version of civility that is both precise and fearful, as if we're walking a bridge made of glass and we're counting each step, afraid of a slip that could shatter the morning light. At the clinic, the patients bring their own confessions, and I listen with the careful attention I owe to a stranger's wound, even while I nurse my own. I tell them that truth can be a difficult friend, that honesty is not a proclamation, but a discipline, an ongoing choice to tell the next truth even when the last one hurt. It's a version of the counsel I can barely summon for myself. By Thursday, the lie begins to shed some of its clothes, revealing the shape of what lies beneath. A social event, a gallery opening with a handful of colleagues from the hospital, a small crowd that knows us well enough to sense the tremor in our routine candor. We go because social rituals are sometimes the only balm medicine can provide, the bark of laughter in a crowded room, the way a glass of wine makes memory lean in closer to the mind, the way a familiar face glances at you and pretends not to notice the fracture you pretend not to feel. The first hint of the hidden truth arrives as a fragment, and I catch it only because the room's noise becomes suddenly too loud, as though the air itself has learned to listen for what we're afraid to say. A friend, the one who keeps a ledger of other people's moods in his notebook, asks me gently, almost too politely, about our marriage. He says, "You two seem different lately. Is there something you're both ready to name?" The question lands in the proper, almost ceremonial way, like a doctor asking permission to proceed with the examination. I look at him and then at my husband, who has learned to brace his own shoulders against the room's soft gravity. The lie's breath warms the night air between us, but I feel another breath, the breath of something I've kept locked away. The memory arrives not as a roar, but as a cautious testimony. I didn't simply tell a harmless lie to smooth a dinner. I've been carrying a secret version of myself that I've learned to hide behind the humor of ordinary days, behind the routine of a life that looks complete from the outside, but aches inside with a mismatch between who I am and who I pretend to be. The truth wants to be heard, not screamed, and the moment in the gallery hall feels like a narrow corridor in which we might choose the door to truth or the door to retreat. He stands closer than usual, a quiet sentinel, a man who has learned to trust the room even when the room has begun to distrust him. He does not challenge the question. He invites the confession by not flinching when I show the first crack in my armor, the tremor in my voice, the way my breath hiccups when I speak. After the opening, we retreat to the quiet of the bathroom, where the hush insists on privacy even as strangers pass in the hallway beyond the door. There, with the mirror as a stern witness, I begin to speak what I have kept secret for too long. I do not start with the darkest thing. I start with the smallest pivot, the moment I tell myself I can tell the truth in measured pieces, that the truth will not break us if we handle it gently enough. Then, as if the room itself remembers every old argument we ever swallowed, I tell him the thing I have kept back, not just the lie's content, but the motive that grew out of the lie's seed: fear of abandonment, fear of becoming a person who wakes one day and finds the marriage she loved is not the life she can inhabit without risking her own sense of self. I tell him that the afternoon with the market and the vendor was never the simple, almost innocent outing I claimed. The truth is more complicated and uglier and more human. I went downtown not merely to wander, but to test a version of myself that could survive a life without this particular marriage if it ever came to that. I did not intend to destroy us. I intended to see if I could still breathe freely within a future that might include him, or perhaps a future that excluded him. I tell him that in the moment I lied, I chose the smaller risk, the shield that would protect the life we'd built, over the greater risk of letting the truth breathe and perhaps setting the life we'd built on fire. The confession is not loud, it is measured, and I watch for his response the way a patient watches for a doctor's next question, not knowing if it will be healing or invasive. He finishes listening, and when I finish, the room holds its breath with us. He does not rage, he does not plead for mercy, he does not condemn. He speaks with the same careful cadence he used with patience, naming what he hears and what it costs to hear it. He asks a question I did not expect: what would you need from me now to tell the rest? It's not a demand, but a solicitation of the future. The question is both a challenge and a mercy, a road we might walk together if we decide to walk at all. I feel the old fear, the fear that telling more will end us, that truth will be heavier than the weight of the lie. But I also feel a strange and growing relief. To lay the rest of the secret on the table is not only to confess a fault, but to remove a stone from the place where fear kept growing. We decide to seek a couples therapist who can hold the room for the talks we cannot yet bear to have in our own living space, a person who can translate the tremors into a language we both understand. The therapist's office is quiet, the shelves heavy with books about attachment, trust, and healing. We sit across from one another, and then across from the same professional who asks us to name the fear beneath the fear, to trace the lie to its origin, to consider how memory sometimes invents a safety net from which we can no longer climb. In that room, I tell more, not to minimize the hurt I caused, but to illuminate the heart of the matter, the fear that if the truth lands, it will not merely wound the marriage, but will reveal the truth I fear most about myself, that I'm not the person I want to be when I'm not believed, that I'm more comfortable wearing a mask than risking the exposure of my own fragility. The therapist names this as a common human truth. Honesty is not simply a moral act, it is a daily act of choosing to be visible, to let another person bear witness to the raw edges of your life. Weeks drift by like a season you cannot name at first, then realize you've been watching for a long, quiet change you didn't know you needed. The lie's first tremor has settled into memory's far edges, and though it still aches when you stumble over a word you refuse to name, the room around us has learned to hold us differently. We have learned a new arithmetic of honesty, tiny daily sums, not grand proclamations, that add up to something steadier than any single truth could have promised. I tell myself the work isn't glamorous, that growth rarely arrives wearing a guidebook or a bright banner. It arrives as the patient, stubborn discipline and attention, the refusal to skip the dull, necessary sentences, the willingness to weather the boring, ordinary talks that never felt heroic enough to attempt before. Our home has learned a new choreography, slower and more deliberate, like a dance learned in a dim room where the lights aren't bright enough to reveal every misstep, but bright enough to see the right foot when it lands. What changes most is not the room or the rhythm, but the space inside us where fear used to live. Fear still visits, of course. Its knock on the door is unrelenting, and it wears different faces depending on the hour. It appears as a memory of a future that might not hold us, as a fear of being diminished by a truth we might not be prepared to bear, as the simple dread that we will slip back into old patterns if we stop paying attention. But it no longer rules. We practice naming it, then choosing the next honest word anyway. The therapy, once a distant, almost clinical decision, has become a habit we rely on. The therapist's chair is now a familiar place we both approach with something like humility, something that feels almost like affection for the process itself. We're not cured. We are being retaught how to live with one another in a way that allows the truth to land without breaking us apart. The room where we sit is no longer a battlefield, but a shared ground where we test questions we used to avoid. At work, I find myself telling patients not just about how truth can heal, but how truth must arrive in careful, manageable portions. There is a discipline to honesty that I once forgot, a method in which the heart speaks when it can bear to do so, and the mind learns to hold what the heart reveals without immediately turning it into a verdict. The words I offer them are the words I need to hear